The air in the darkroom used to hum with a certain magic, a silent symphony of chemicals and light. It was my sanctuary, a place where time bent and the outside world faded. Now, when I step inside, the silence screams. The lingering scent of fixer and stop bath, once comforting, feels like a ghost, a suffocating shroud. It's been years since I truly worked there, not since Brooklyn became a crucible, not since everything I thought I knew about myself, my art, and the people I loved, dissolved into a bitter, acrid fume. I was Leo Vance, a fine art photographer, meticulous by nature, quiet in my passion. My world was framed through a lens, my truths developed in the red glow of a safe light. My closest confidant, my brother in everything but blood, was Arthur. We grew up side by side, shared scraped knees, whispered secrets, and dreamt of making our mark in the city's burgeoning art scene. He was boisterous where I was reserved, extroverted where I was introspective, but our bond felt unbreakable, forged in decades of shared history. When I spoke, he listened. When he needed an ear, I was there. Our unspoken pact was the bedrock of my quiet life. Then Clara walked in. It was an open call for a new series I was planning, something raw and vulnerable about urban isolation. She floated into my studio like a siren, all sharp angles and luminous skin, an aspiring model with eyes that seemed to hold both deep sadness and fierce ambition. Her hair was a cascade of dark waves, her smile a promise. My camera, an extension of my soul, seemed to recognize her instantly, drawn to her like iron to a magnet. The first few clicks felt different, electric. I felt a surge of creative energy I hadn't known was possible. She understood light, understood shadow, seemed to intuitively grasp the emotion I sought to capture. It wasn't just posing, it was a collaboration, a dance. Our connection felt profound, almost spiritual. She spoke about art with an intensity that mirrored my own, saw the nuances in my work that others often missed. She said things like, "Your lens captures the soul, Leo, not just the surface." Words that fed my deepest artistic insecurities, validating the quiet intensity one poured into every frame. She quickly became more than just a model. She became my muse, then my confidant, and eventually, my world. We'd spend hours in my loft, surrounded by film rolls and prints, talking about life, art, the future. I felt a dizzying sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. I confided in her everything, my artistic fears, my dreams, even my occasional frustrations with Arthur's more commercial approach to photography. She listened with an unwavering gaze, her hand often resting gently on my arm, her touch a comforting anchor. Looking back, the red flags weren't flags at all, but tiny, almost imperceptible threads woven into the fabric of our burgeoning intimacy. There was a certain calculated quality to her attentiveness, a mirroring of my deepest thoughts that felt almost too perfect. I remember once, after a particularly draining shoot, she suggested I take a break from working with Arthur on his commercial projects, saying, "You're a fine artist, Leo. Don't let anything dilute your true vision." It felt like support, a protective shield, but now I see it was the first subtle wedge. Another time, she casually remarked that Arthur, despite his bluster, seemed to lack a certain depth in his own conceptual work. "He's good," she'd say, "but he doesn't have your sensitivity, your melancholy." I dismissed these as innocuous observations, perhaps even accurate ones, coming from the woman who understood my artistic soul better than anyone. Her interest in Arthur started subtly, too. She'd ask about his projects, his studio, his connections in the art world. I was flattered, thinking she was simply interested in my whole life, in the people I cared about. I'd bring her to group gatherings, introduce her to Arthur with pride, watching as her charm, like a finely tuned instrument, played to his more gregarious nature. They'd laugh, chat easily, and I'd feel a warmth spread through me, happy that my two most important people were getting along. I was so blinded by the glow of her presence, by the intoxicating feeling of finally having a partner who truly believed in my art, that I missed the subtle shifts in her gaze, the lingering touches, the way her voice took on a softer, more inviting tone when she spoke to him. The first real crack in my perception came like a hairline fracture, almost invisible, easily dismissed. It was a late-night phone call with Arthur. I was excited, full of ideas for a new series of portraits of Clara, some of my most intimate work yet. I described the light, the composition, the raw emotion. Arthur, usually my most ardent supporter, offered only lukewarm feedback. Sounds interesting, Leo, he'd said, a slight hesitation in his voice. Just make sure it doesn't get too niche, you know? For the gallery. I felt a prickle of confusion. He'd never been one to prioritize marketability over artistic integrity, especially not with my personal projects. I chalked it up to stress on his end, or perhaps a fleeting mood. Clara, however, seemed to amplify this unease. Arthur doesn't really understand your vision, does he? She'd murmur, her fingers tracing patterns on my arm as we lay in bed. He's too commercial, too focused on trends. He can't see the depth in true art, the kind you create. Her words were a balm, validating my nascent insecurities about Arthur's changing demeanor, yet simultaneously planting a seed of doubt about his loyalty. She'd lament how lonely it must be to be an artist of my caliber, how few people truly grasped my genius. She created an us-against-the-world narrative, positioning herself as my sole ally, my protector. My once easy conversations with Arthur became stilted. He seemed to pull away, to offer less of himself. I'd ask about his projects, and he'd give vague answers, or quickly shift the conversation. When I spoke about Clara, about the incredible inspiration she was, he'd often nod distractedly, or change the subject to something mundane. You're spending a lot of time in the darkroom, Leo, he'd once remarked, a strange note of criticism in his voice. Don't forget there's a world outside. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Was he jealous of my happiness? Of my new artistic fervor? Clara, of course, was there to interpret. He's just worried you'll outshine him, darling. Talented people often intimidate others. Her whispers were poison, seeping into the cracks of my oldest friendship, eroding the foundation. I remember one afternoon, I'd stopped by Arthur's studio, unannounced, something I'd done countless times since we were teenagers. The door was ajar, and I heard laughter, a sound that quickly faded into hushed voices. Peeking in, I saw Clara, her back to me, her hand resting on Arthur's arm as they leaned close together, looking at something on his computer screen. They both started when I cleared my throat, a sudden, almost guilty jolt in their movements. Arthur's face was flushed, and Clara's smile, though instant, felt brittle, a mask slipping into place. Leo, what a surprise, she'd chirped, a little too brightly. Arthur was just showing me some of his new lighting techniques. Very interesting. Arthur just mumbled. Yeah, just a quick chat. My stomach twisted. I tried to rationalize it then, told myself I was being paranoid. They were friends, right? Colleagues. I loved them both. Why would I ever suspect anything nefarious? But the image, the sudden silence, the way they had looked at each other, it burrowed deep, a cold, unwelcome premonition. Clara's psychological pressure continued to mount, subtle and insidious. She'd occasionally confess doubts about my gallery representation, mentioning, I heard they're having financial troubles, or some of the critics think your work is a bit too esoteric for the mainstream. Each comment, delivered with a sigh of concern, was designed to shake my confidence, to make me feel more dependent on her as my sole champion, my only true believer. She'd say, don't listen to them, Leo. You're brilliant. Arthur just doesn't have the stomach for the real struggle of an artist like you. The gaslighting became more pronounced. I'd bring up a previous conversation, a detail from a memory, and she'd gently correct me. Oh, Leo, you always get that mixed up. I said X, not Y. Or, you must have misunderstood. Arthur was clearly joking when he said that. My own memories began to feel fluid, unreliable. I started to second-guess everything, my intuition, my perceptions. The ground beneath me felt increasingly unstable. I found myself relying more and more on Clara to interpret the world for me, to tell me what was real, what was true. She was always so calm, so logical, so certain. There was a moment, indelible in its insidious clarity, when I felt the full weight of her manipulation, though I couldn't articulate it then. Clara had urged me to apply for a prestigious grant, praising my new series featuring her as groundbreaking. I spent weeks pouring my soul into the application. When I didn't get it, she was the first to console me. It's a shame, Leo, she'd said, her voice dripping with sympathy. But honestly, Those panels often favor artists with more connections, artists who have someone really pushing for them. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, Arthur mentioned he was going to apply for the same grant, too, with a portfolio that's perhaps a bit more accessible. A cold dread washed over me. Arthur hadn't mentioned it to me, not a word. The thought that he might have applied, perhaps even secretly, twisted in my gut. Why would he hide it? And why would Clara tell me this now? Was it to console me, or to further isolate me from him? I found myself retreating further, believing Clara's narrative that Arthur was becoming a rival rather than my friend. My art, my life, my sense of self, it all became increasingly intertwined with her validation, her interpretation. I was a puppet, and she was subtly pulling the strings, isolating me from my past, twisting my present, and dictating my future. The gallery opening was supposed to be my triumph. Unveiling shadows, I'd called it. The space was pristine, stark white walls amplifying the rich, nuanced tones of my black and white prints. Each photograph, a portrait of Clara, a reflection of what I believed was the deep, vulnerable connection we shared. Her face, her form, her emotions, captured in exquisite detail. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of pride, vulnerability, and a desperate longing for validation. Clara was there, radiant in a crimson dress, moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations as if she were the artist herself. Arthur was there too, looking somewhat uncomfortable, drifting on the periphery. The room buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses. My name, Clara's name, murmured in various accents. I felt a flush of pride, the culmination of years of quiet dedication. Then, the buzz shifted. A sudden hush, followed by a murmur of surprise, emanating from a small gathering around Arthur and Clara. My gut clenched. I saw Arthur, a microphone in his hand, a nervous smile plastered on his face. Clara stood beside him, her hand casually resting on his arm, her eyes sparkling with an almost predatory glee. Excuse me, everyone. Arthur's voice, amplified by the speaker, cut through the din. I have a rather exciting announcement. My blood ran cold. He met my eyes across the room. A brief flicker of what looked like shame, quickly masked. Clara and I have been working very closely on a new venture. We're incredibly excited to announce the launch of Vanguard Arts Collective, a new studio and gallery focusing on innovative, contemporary work. The words hit me like physical blows. Clara squeezed his arm, her smile widening. And, Arthur continued, we're also delighted to announce that Clara and I are officially together. The room erupted in a polite round of applause, but for me, the sound was deafening, a roar in my ears. The gallery lights blurred, the faces of the patrons became indistinct smudges. I felt a sudden, profound vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. My vision tunneled. Together, not just a studio, but together? The world tilted on its axis. My oldest friend, my muse, my supposed love. A visceral wave of nausea washed over me, a chilling coldness spreading through my limbs. I stumbled back, seeking the nearest wall for support, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes were fixed on them, two figures bathed in the harsh gallery light, their betrayal illuminated for all to see. Clara leaned in, her lips close to Arthur's ear, a conspiratorial whisper. I was close enough, still reeling, still rooted to the spot, to catch a fragment of her words, carried on the air, cutting through the celebratory din like a razor blade. She thought she was being discreet, but the universe, in its cruel irony, made sure I heard. He was so easy to control. Arthur, she breathed, her voice laced with a dark amusement, a casual cruelty that made my blood run cold. His melancholy, his artistic insecurities, they made him so pliable. Perfect material for a muse, wasn't he? So lost in his own head, he never saw a thing. The words detonated within me. Not just a betrayal, but a complete, brutal demolition of my reality. My profound connection, my muse, my inspiration, my love, it was all a performance, a calculated manipulation. My art, born from my deepest vulnerabilities, had been weaponized against me. The warmth of love, the fire of creation, everything I had poured into those photographs of her, of us, transformed instantly into ash, a bitter taste on my tongue. The shame was a living thing, crawling under my skin, scorching my heart. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was annihilated. My identity as an artist, as a man, as a person who understood the world, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I wanted to scream, to weep, to smash every one of those beautiful, lying portraits of her. But I stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the deceit, the utter devastation of being so completely, utterly played. The darkroom, my sanctuary, had been invaded, poisoned, its red glow extinguished, leaving behind only shadows. The aftermath was a blur of numbing pain. I retreated entirely, locking myself in my loft, the once vibrant space now feeling like a tomb. The phone rang incessantly, Arthur trying to explain, friends confused, but I answered none of them. The gallery opening, meant to be my moment of triumph, had become the stage for my public humiliation. Every frame of Clara, every delicate curve of her neck, every intense gaze, now screamed betrayal. They weren't just photographs. They were monuments to my naivety, my gullibility. My lens felt heavy in my hand, my fingers numb to the touch of film. The darkroom, once a place of creation and solace, became suffocating. The air, thick with the phantom scent of chemicals, mocked me, reminding me of the artistry I thought I shared, the life I thought I was building. I stopped eating, lost track of days. Sleep offered no escape. Only nightmares of Clara's sneering face, Arthur's averted gaze, the chilling echo of her whispered words, easy to control. The shame was a living, breathing thing inside me, devouring my insides. My mind raced, replaying every interaction, every shared laugh, every intimate moment. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, but each click brought a fresh wave of nausea. Her subtle critiques of Arthur, her feigned concern for my unique artistic struggle, her gentle corrections of my memories, her unwavering support that neatly separated me from my oldest friend. It was all so clear now, sickeningly so. I saw the puppet strings, felt the phantom tugs. I had been her canvas, her prop, her stepping stone. The emotional collapse was absolute. I questioned everything. My artistic voice, my judgment, my ability to discern truth from falsehood. Was my art, born from such a manipulated space, even authentic? Was I truly Leo Vance, the meticulous, passionate photographer, or just a shell, an empty vessel for her ambition? The crisis of identity was more profound than the heartbreak. Heartbreak heals. A shattered sense of self leaves you adrift. Days bled into weeks. I barely moved from the sofa, staring blankly at the brick wall opposite my window. The light shifted, day to night, seasons changed, and I remained suspended in a void. But slowly, painstakingly, a flicker of something began to stir in the darkness. It was a faint spark of anger, a smoldering ember that refused to die. Not just anger at them, but a deep, righteous anger at myself for allowing it, for being so blind, so trusting. This anger, surprisingly, was not destructive. It was a catalyst. It forced me to look at the ruins of my life, not with despair, but with a growing, fierce resolve. I couldn't undo what happened, but I could refuse to let it define me. I would not remain easy to control. The awakening was painful, a stripping away of illusions. It was realizing that my perception of love and inspiration had been warped, twisted into a tool for someone else's gain. The true strength, the true artistry, wasn't in finding a muse, but in finding myself, independent of any external validation. The thought came to me during one particularly long, sleepless night, staring at a dusty map pinned to my wall. The American West, vast and unyielding, untouched, unmanipulated. The decision to leave Brooklyn was abrupt, decisive. I didn't announce it, didn't seek goodbyes or explanations. I packed only the essentials, my camera, a few lenses, rolls of film, a small backpack of clothes, and a notebook. I sold my loft, packed up the darkroom equipment for storage, keeping only my most beloved camera, its weight of familiar comfort in my hand. The city, once my home, now felt like an open wound, a constant reminder of my failure. I needed to breathe air that hadn't been poisoned by deceit, to see landscapes that hadn't witnessed my collapse. The first steps were heavy, each one an effort against the inertia of my sorrow. But with every mile I put between myself and Brooklyn, a tiny fragment of my spirit, shattered for so long, began to mend. The physical act of moving, of driving, of leaving was an exorcism. My journey across the American West became my therapy, my pilgrimage. The vast, raw landscapes of Utah, the stark beauty of the Arizona desert, the towering majesty of the Rockies, they offered a canvas for my healing. There were no muses here, no artifice, no hidden agendas, just the brutal, honest truth of rock, sky, and light. I slept under stars so bright they felt like a balm. Listened to the wind whisper through canyons, not manipulative lies, but ancient, indifferent truths. My photography changed. It wasn't about capturing human emotion or finding a muse in another's face. It was about raw, elemental power. I shot sweeping vistas, the texture of weathered rock, the dance of light on a distant peak, the solitary resilience of a desert flower. Each click of the shutter was a meditation, a release. I wasn't seeking perfection or external approval. I was simply seeking to bear witness, to connect with the authentic beauty of a world untainted by human cruelty. I learned to trust my eye again, my intuition, my own unadulterated vision. The act of creation became less about proving myself and more about profound self-expression, a conversation between me and the land. I processed my film in makeshift darkrooms, a tent at times, a rented cabin, improvising with what I had. The red light, once a reminder of my broken past, slowly began to reclaim its comforting glow. My hands, once numb, regained their sensitivity, finding joy in the precise mechanics of development. I wasn't just developing images, I was developing a new version of myself. It took years. The scars remain, indelible marks on my soul. I'm no longer the quiet, perhaps naive, Leo Vance who poured his entire being into another's deceptive reflection. I am stronger, more discerning, more deeply rooted in my own truth. I eventually returned to the art world, not in Brooklyn, but in a different city, with a new collection. My landscapes, stark and powerful, resonated deeply. They were free of manipulation, free of the need for external validation. They were simply mine. Sometimes, a memory surfaces, a fleeting image of Clara's smile, a phantom echo of Arthur's laugh. The pain is no longer sharp, no longer debilitating. It's a dull ache, a reminder of the immense cost of my education. I understand now that my art was always my own, independent of any muse or manipulator. My creative passion wasn't given to me by Clara. It was always inside me, waiting to be unleashed, purified by fire. The quiet nature that once made me easy to control has evolved into a quiet strength, an unshakable inner compass. I found my liberation in the vast, open spaces and my healing in the stark, honest light of my own lens. My darkroom is truly a sanctuary once more, not for escaping the world, but for revealing its deepest, most authentic truths. And in that, I am finally free.